Hi.
Hi.
Hi. I'm struggling with my earring.
Mm.
I came unprepared for class this evening. Forgot to put my earrings in. Ah, there it goes. Okay, so then I'll show them off because they're particularly nice ones that one of my readers gave to me, and you can't really even see them, but they're quite nice. They're black onyx. And I
Beautiful.
love them. I do. So we're
They
going
look they
basic.
look wonderful on you. Yep.
Thank you. We're going in basic black tonight.
I got the memo.
Yep, apparently you did.
Mhm.
And, now Bill is asking us if every week we'll write a little synopsis for the show, because as it goes out in all the different platforms, it'll get more notice if it has a show description, which that makes perfect sense. But we
Mhm.
never did that before. We always just talked on the phone or texted back and forth with each other. What's going on? Where do you want to go with it this week? And when we say the words class is in session, where are we going with this? And I believe that you were tied up. And so I wrote a little ditty to include in the show tonight. And it basically ended with, we're going to clean house. So bring your broomstick.
Mm.
And, and then that sounded all magical and stuff to me. And I thought, wow, that's profound. I mean,
Mhm.
stick is, we associate it oddly with so many different things, and yet its main
Yes.
function and its main purpose is to clean your house.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, as you said that, a thought just came to me. I'm going to look up real quick. Um, then
He
I'm sure it's going
brings
to come back later in the show. Um, yeah, and we had said that we were going to kind of, because we talked about a lot of stuff last week, and
Yes, we did.
we talked about the 444 synchronicities that you and I were experiencing, and some of the symbolisms that we both tied to them and kind of uncovered within that. And one of the things that I really landed on, for me personally anyways, was that it's a call forward. It's a call into the new. It's a call into whatever it is that's next, right?
Hmm.
And I've found myself over the last year in no, that's not right. I found myself in more than the last year, but it's been accelerated in the last year, where I've really kind of felt like I've really been inhabiting this liminal space, right? This in between, not quite here, not quite there place. And it's been, I wouldn't say an area of not struggle, because it's not like a painful thing, but a just sort of, I know there's a calling. I know there's something, someone calling me forward into something new, but I've kind of been in this middle spot, you know what I mean? And so I've been really challenged. And I even reached out to you last week, just being like, hey, what are you hearing? What are you feeling for me personally? I reached out to some other mentors in my life as well. Just, I
Yeah,
always have that multitude
yeah.
of counselors
And
where
we
it was
all feel stuck in Middle Earth.
yeah,
We all
yeah,
do. It's like, we're stuck somewhere, stuck between Earth 1 and Earth 2.
right,
And like we're stuck where the hobbits live.
right.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I remember a couple of months maybe ago, you had told the story about a woman you encountered. Was her name Angela? Or it was a woman you encountered
Angela,
maybe at the airport. Yes.
that gave me a
And then
ride
you had,
home when I was standing there weeping because I
yeah, and
couldn't
you
walk to the Uber spot.
right, and you made the comment about how you always encounter these earth angels, if you will, at
I do.
airports. There's something about the airport.
Yeah.
And I remember the thought striking me in that moment and saying something to you, and then us even saying, we need to come back and revisit that one of these days. But it was the fact that you were like, I don't quite know what that's about. And the thought came to me that you always encounter the angelic in spaces of liminality. Liminal spaces, for those who don't know, just meaning not quite here, not quite there. It's the space in between. It's the
Yeah.
hallway. It's actually a word, etymologically, that's linked to the idea of a rite of passage, where a young man or a young woman would move into adulthood, and there would be some sort of ritual to signify this. it was more typical in the males of our species that there would be these sort of forced maturations through these rituals, simply because women have them foisted upon them by nature and don't really have a choice. Nature kind of demands you guys grow up quicker than us, and if we don't have it forced on us, we tend to remain babies forever. you know?
You are not going to get any argument from me about that.
No, I didn't think so.
No.
But that idea of the rite of passage, a place of something that forces you from childhood into adulthood. But that's where the word liminality etymologically comes from. And so, I remembered finding myself in that space a few years back and then learning that as I was studying liminality, rites of passage, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, well, the very fact that I'm here and the very fact that this is the word we use to signify this space that I'm in tells me that I'm undergoing some sort of ritual, some sort of initiatory ritual, if you will, just to use language that makes it seem more epic. That is, there is something on the other side of this that I'm being pulled towards, that I'm being drawn towards, but there is a sort of pain threshold I have to cross in order to get there. And I've been experiencing that over the last few years. And by pain, that's relative. I don't mean like I've been in the throes of depression or anguish or anything like that. I just mean some painful burnings off of things that are no longer appropriate for this next season of my life. And but I even reached out to you about that last week, and a few others, just about like, okay, because for me, and I'm just kind of sharing this personally with people, an audience whom I'm very comfortable with sharing personal things with at this point, and yourself as well. As most of you know, I was a pastor for 12 plus years of my life. Pardon me. I was involved in ministry work prior to that. I've been involved in ministry work post all of that, right? And I stepped away from that several years ago, not away from that calling, but away from that position because my beliefs no longer meshed with those of the denomination that I belonged to. And I just kind of felt it was dishonest to stay within that. For a time, it worked. For a time, it was okay. But then it came to the point where I just felt like I'm just not doing anyone a favor by staying here. Certainly not myself, certainly not my family. And it grated against me because I try to be a person of integrity. And, if I can't be completely upfront with where I am and who I am and what I am, then it's just not for me,
Well,
And
our spine has
mhm,
to be in alignment
yes.
for every part of our bodies to work right. I have a terrible pain in the neck
Mm,
right now, and I know I need a chiropractic adjustment.
mm,
I need to have the atlas there put back where it belongs because that's what's causing all of this pain down my neck and into my shoulder.
mm,
And all I have to do is call and make an appointment and go to the chiropractor and get this fixed. And so I will do that because that is the responsible thing to do for my own body.
mhm,
Um, and why is it and why would it be different in terms of how we cleanse our minds if we
mm,
are going to live a fulfilled, happy life to the extent that we are able?
mhm,
And every now and then we have to clear the clutter. I say that sitting in a room
mm,
where there's no shortage of clutter, but every single thing in this room has a place and a purpose and a point. And what's sitting behind me over here, some of it's going to Goodwill, some's going out into the closet. I said to Bill before we got on, some's going out to the barn. Couldn't do it today because it was raining. No, so there it sits and it's clutter, but it's organized clutter. We know where it's going to land. We know, how to clear that spot out, and that will happen when the
mhm,
rain stops.
yeah.
So in the interim, I think the metaphor is that we learn to live with the clutter, but we don't
Mm,
have to do that with our thoughts.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and I think last week we ended the show with what was a very important point. That point being that, we prepare our own little mini syllabus every
Mhm,
week with a few
right.
texts or a quick phone call.
Right.
But class is never not in session.
Mhm,
And even though we open it with class is in session, and we close the show with class dismissed.
Yeah.
We're never dismissed.
No.
We're just moving on to the next class.
Right.
We're just moving down the hall of the middle school to, room B8 from B3. That's
Yeah.
all this is perpetual motion, this
Mhm.
soul school thing that we all go through. And eventually your locker gets too full
Mhm.
and you've just thrown too many things in it on your way between one room and the next. And you go by it and you quick, you open it up, you throw stuff in, you slam the door. And then one day you open that locker and everything spills out on the floor. And you
Yes.
have to look at your clutter and see what you should salvage and what you should dispense with and what serves you and what doesn't.
Yes. Yep. And then, yeah, and that's when you have to make the choice of obviously what you have to let go of. And I guess I was saying what I was saying before for this reason, to say that, I came to that point in my life where it was like I couldn't sit through our regular Tuesday staff meetings without breaking down in tears,
Oh,
um,
honey,
just because it was like,
I'm sorry.
oh, it was just that thing where you just realized you were being, the leaf was being pushed off of the tree. The baby eagle was being pushed out of the nest. This isn't where it was being made uncomfortable for me for a reason, because I had probably stayed longer, probably stayed about a year longer than I should, just for the sheer security of it. It was my career. This is what I went to school for. This was literally what I had set in my mind, that this is my career for the rest of my life. This is how I
Right,
provide for my family. And while providing for my family, I am also being provided for spiritually and emotionally, because I love the work that I do of teaching and of serving people. But it came to a point I couldn't do it anymore, because there was a certain set of beliefs that you have to agree to and say, this is what I believe. And I
mhm,
knew I just wasn't there anymore. And it grated against my soul, because, like I said, I tried very hard to be a person of integrity. And I don't want to be associated with something that I'm not 100% in agreement with. And then people think that I am, and then think they are going to then emulate the tenets of this system because they respect me, when I myself am not even aligned anymore. You know what I mean? So I just kind of found myself in that place, exactly like you said. And there was all this clutter, and I was like, I have to let go. And there was that final time I'm literally sitting in the staff meeting with the 5 other pastors who are on staff. And I can't help it. I just like lose it. Nothing triggered it. Like, as far as what was said, nothing was done in that room that made it happen. It just all just came gushing out, and I realized, okay, this is it. I can't do this anymore. And I had to make that break, and I had to step away. And it was very, very, very difficult. However, the life that found me on the other side of letting that go was beautiful. You want to know what was beautiful? This is not even a grand thing, but the first Sunday morning that I slept in
yeah.
was almost worth it. I remember that first Sunday morning when I didn't have to get up and go and preach and arrange the music and everything else. And there's nothing wrong with that. Actually, I look back on it with nothing but the fondest of memories. But that first Sunday morning, I got up and I hear lawnmowers going, and people are out on their front porches, and I'm like, boy, the world still runs between 10 and noon on Sunday mornings, because in my mind it was only ever taking place within those 4 walls. And
Mhm.
so that was something. But then a whole life formed outside of that was very beautiful, and that was something I never could have imagined prior to. But it was painful to make that decision. It was painful to make that choice. But I just looked, and it was 14:44 minutes that we were in, by the way. So there's our
Yes,
three
I
fours.
saw it too.
Yes. But there was that call forward, but the call forward demanded something be let go. And it's terrifying to let go of your clutter, because, I love the show Hoarders, if you've ever watched the show Hoarders.
I
And
can't. It makes me too anxiety ridden. I've seen like 5
same,
minutes of the show.
but
I'm like, I can't do this.
anytime I need to clean out a closet or something, though, I just put it on and I'm like, okay, let's go clean everything. It makes me feel like, so, okay, let's go clean. But when you watch it, and at first you're just like, oh, gross, man. How could anybody let that happen? And then you hear the stories of the people. And it's like, these are people who went through a real trauma, and they stopped moving forward at the point where they experienced that trauma. right? They lost somebody, either like they lost them to death, or they lost a relationship, or whatever. There's always some trauma, and it's usually a death or the loss of a relationship. And then they stop there, and then they stop letting go of things, and so everything stays exactly as it is, and then they start amassing things. So they never let go of the last breath they breathed, right? And so it becomes poison in their lungs. Why do they not let it go? Because they're afraid now of loss. They feel like they have to cling and hold on, lest nothing ever come to them. And they don't want to let these things go. And then it results in the clutter and the hoarding. And so whenever there is that spiritual clutter even within us, I think a lot of times there's something similar there. There's some kind of fear of letting go. There's a fear of, well, for me, even the fear of letting go of the past, or is like, well, what if I never find something as fulfilling as this? You know,
Yeah.
I'd never worked a normal job, quote unquote, in my entire adult life. You know, I had always done something like that. So what if I never find something as spiritually and emotionally fulfilling or whatever? And so there's that fear of letting go. But when you let it go, there's always that moment at the end of the show when they walk in and they've cleaned it out and they've painted it. They're like, oh my God, this is what I've been missing out on all these years. I forgot how much space there was in here. I forgot how much beauty there actually was in this place, because all of this clutter I have amassed was blinding me to it. And the same is true with the soul. Like you amass so much and you forget who you are, and then you let it go. You let that breath go, and you've gotten so used to holding your breath. You've gotten used to your face being blue and being, feeling like you're on the brink of passing out. And then you let it go, and it's terrifying when you let it go. But then instantly, breath finds you again, and you're like, oh, that's what it's like to be alive. you
Mhm.
know. But you have to let go of the thing you fear letting go of in order for life to find you again. And I was meditating on this just before we came on, and it was a quote. If I can read two quotes real quick.
Go right ahead, honey.
Okay.
It's your show too.
Okay. One is just cut me off because I can talk forever. Uh, one is a quote from Alan Watts. This is pulled from one of his lectures, but he just says the attitude of faith is the very opposite of clinging and holding on. In other words, a person who is fanatic in matters of religion and clings to certain ideas about the nature of God and the universe becomes a person who has no faith at all. Instead, they are holding tight. But the attitude of faith is to let go and become open to truth, whatever it might turn out to be. So we often think of faith as being clinging to something, white knuckling, and not
Well,
letting
yeah, you
go
have
of
to
revelation.
memorize the doctrine, the dogma, the this, the that. I
Right.
mean, and you spew it right back out. I mean, whether in Catholic Church it was the Hail Mary, it was um, uh, Our Father who art in heaven, the
Hmm.
creed, the this, the that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And you got to cling. And we were taught that that was what faith was. We were taught that faith was um, never questioning your answers, and always having answers to everyone's questions. But faith really is questioning all of the answers that you think you have. Faith and certainty, or faith and doubt, aren't opposites. Faith
Mhm.
and certainty are opposites. That faith and certainty are complete opposites of one another, whereas faith and doubt actually work together, because you're allowed to let go and then things find you, right? The other quote is from Emerson. This is from Compensation, and it's one of my favorite quotes. But he says, we cannot part with our friends. We cannot let our angels go. We do not see that they only go out, that archangels may come in. We are idolaters of the old. We do not believe in the riches of the soul in its proper eternity and omnipresence. We do not believe there is any force in today to rival or recreate that beautiful yesterday. We linger in the ruins of the old tent where once we had bread and shelter and organs, nor believe that the spirit can feed, cover, and nerve us again. We cannot again find aught so dear, so sweet, so graceful, but we sit and weep in vain. The voice of the Almighty saith, up and onward forevermore. We cannot stay amid the ruins, neither will we rely on the new, and so we walk ever with reverted eyes like those monsters who look backwards. And
Okay, now let me say something about Emerson,
please.
who is one of, I love Ralph.
Mm.
I love him. And one of the things that I was most moved about, I read Emerson in the seventh grade when nobody else would touch it.
Mm.
I mean, but it had such an impact on me when I read Emerson's essays.
Mhm.
My teacher gave me an A for the semester just because I read the book by choice.
Mm.
Okay, so that's where I am with Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Yes.
His house burned to the ground.
Mm.
Um, I don't think they ever found the source of the fire.
Mm.
And everybody in town came rushing to the minister's house to save his papers, all of his essays, everything that he had ever written, everything that he had ever accomplished in his life was in that house.
Mm.
And they all tried in vain. The whole village came and tried in vain to save the house. And they found him sitting on top of a hill nearby,
Mm.
leaning up against a maple tree.
Mm.
And when one of the neighbors walked up to him, probably assuming that the man was in shock, came over to him and asked him what he was doing. And he said, "I'm watching the fire. Isn't
Mm.
it beautiful?"
Mm. That reminds me of the story of Henry Ford, something similar, as one of his factories burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
And everyone's out in the streets just like, your life's work, what are you going to do?
Everything. Yeah.
And he says to his wife, well, go call your friends because you're never going to see a fire like this one again. You know, and like it's and what did he do? He kept moving forward. He kept going. He didn't stop, and of course he didn't. And like the man or don't like the man, but still, it's like it reminds me of a friend of mine from South Africa, Francois Dutoy, who's a Bible translator, who's kind of in the process of constantly translating the New Testament into an edition he calls the Mirror Bible. It's kind of a living document he always updates every few years. So it's never a complete Matthew through Revelation. It kind of exists in part, but it's a really beautiful translation. In some ways, maybe more of a commentary than a word for word translation from the Greek, but still beautifully done. And I love the man's heart. But who had a similar experience when he worked tirelessly, something like, I think 30, 40 years ago. Him and his wife, he worked in this little cabin and was translating. There was a fire. All of his work, it's not on a computer, it's all literally on paper, went up in smoke. I mean, years and years of poring over the Greek and learning it and translating it by hand, and it goes up in smoke. How easy would it be in that moment to just give up, right? To just give up. But instead, he embraced it as a necessary thing, and he kept going. And now the man, I mean, who at the time was unknown, who for all he knew no one was ever going to know what the Mirror Bible was, and at the time it was called something different, and now it's a translation that's spreading like wildfire and becoming increasingly popular all over the world. And but he had to embrace that purging as something like Henry Ford, never see a fire like this again, like Emerson, watching the fire. There was that letting go, and then the, okay, we have to keep moving forward. And actually, I have my New Revised Standard open in front of me, New Revised Standard version open in front of me, just from last week, because I was just going through 444 verses, just because I just do that, looking for significance. And John 4, I'm sorry, Luke 4:44 says this. So he continued proclaiming the message in the synagogues of Judea. And that one just hit me. It's just like he just kept going. He just continued despite the hardship, despite the rejection, because he's rejected in his hometown. There's all sorts of things that happened, but he just keeps preaching. He just continues to do what he does and spreading the message of the kingdom of God. And that's the forward motion. That's the 444 calling. That's what Emerson says. He's like, look, we can't let go of our angels because we're afraid nothing will ever come back to us. But we don't realize that in letting them go, we let them go so that archangels might come to us. It's like the boat illustration we talked about last week. We feel like we can't let go of the boat that we escaped the prison island in once we reach dry land because, well, this is a faithful friend that carried me to this place. but it doesn't serve you on dry land to carry a boat on your back. So you might have to make firewood of it so that you can survive the cold nights. You might have to repurpose it into tools that will help you cut through vines and branches. You might have to just leave it there. But leaving it, burning it, tearing it apart and repurposing it is not in any way, shape, or form a dishonoring of it.
Right.
It's, as we said last week, it's liberating the spirit that boat represents, which is the spirit of forward motion. It's the thing that represents the call forward. And whenever it becomes an impediment to the call forward, you either leave it or you repurpose it, and the spirit of that thing will find you in another form. We were watching the movie Up, the Disney movie Up, this week, if you've ever seen it, and um, I love it. It's
It's
beautiful.
great. It's brilliant. It's
Yeah,
it's philosophical. It's
it
beautiful.
is, and it makes me bawl every time. It's
Yeah,
just
me
beautifully
too,
done,
Paul.
beautifully done. And I had watched it before with my kids in the theaters, like when it first came out, which was over 10 plus years ago at this point, I
Yeah.
think. And it had been a while since I watched it, and so it hit me different upon this viewing. But the brief, very brief Cliff's Notes version, the Cliff's Notes of the Cliff's Notes version. And spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen it, but there's also like a 10-year moratorium on my like spoiler
There
alert
is.
thing.
It's
Because if you
it's
haven't seen it
it's
yet,
an unwritten
yeah,
law.
yeah, exactly. But basically, there's this man. He's kind of you can tell he's kind of a timid individual, not the most adventurous individual, and he marries this woman whom he adores, who's kind of full of fire and life and zest, and to him really represents the spirit of adventure and this call forward, and he loves her for that. And he himself is kind of more of a shy, quiet individual, but she's like the spark that keeps him going forward. And they're madly in love. There's some tragic things that they experience, and they have this dream of, you know, going out there and seeing the world and doing all these things. And there's this book full of things that she had planned on doing, that they had planned on doing, going to this particular location and doing these particular things, and they never get around to it. She passes before they're able to do those things, but they still live a wonderful, beautiful life with one another. And when she's gone, you can tell the color kind of leaves his life, because she was that color, she was that call, and she was that spark to him. And he feels that there's all these things that they never did, and then you kind of see the modern world encroaching upon his life, and there's buildings going up all around him, and they want to buy up his property, and whatever, put a parking lot there in paradise, what is his paradise, and he's refusing, and he's refusing, and he's refusing, and it finally comes to the point where they're going to haul him away to a home, and he refuses to go, and he rigs up the system with a bunch of balloons and flies away. Long story short, very well, a 2 hour plus movie summed up in about 5 minutes. He ends up going to the place, landing in the place where they always wanted to go, and he's carrying the house around with him basically through the movie, because that represents his wife Ellie, and he talks to it as though it's her, and he carries it with him, and he carries it with him throughout the movie, and can't let go of it until it comes to a point where he kind of has this realization that what his wife was to him, which was that spark and that spirit of adventure, actually lay out there, right, in the world that he was now in and could explore, and these new lives that he had happened upon, that he's now tasked, whether he likes it or not, with saving. And so this whole adventure, it is her spirit, but her spirit's now out there. Her spirit's not in the house anymore, and so he has to let the house go. And he lets it go. And she, in this beautiful sense, reappears in the adventure that he's now on, because that was what she was in the first place. And
Mhm.
actually, funnily enough, they fly home in a Zeppelin that they somehow acquire whilst on this adventure,
Yeah.
him and this little stowaway. And it's called The Spirit of Adventure. And so he leaves the house behind. He takes the adventure in the house. He leaves the house behind, and he returns in a Zeppelin called the Spirit of Adventure, which is the same thing. So he let it go, and then it reappeared to him in this new form. And
Mhm.
that's what life is. Life is this process of following that forward call. Four, 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 move, 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 follow, upward and onward forevermore, as Emerson says. But to do that evermore, there also has to be an ever more, always letting go in some
Mm.
sense. And then you feel you're dishonoring things that are sacred when you let go. But that's just the form that thing is in right now. When you let it go, you release the spirit. You crack open the form that it's almost become a prison for it. That
Yes.
form used to be a stage on which it could dance and you could enjoy it and love it and you could love it together and be there together, but it becomes a prison after a while. And so you have to crack it so that it can be free and reappear in another form. It's even like Jesus. There's the story of the two men on the road to Emmaus. Like, Jesus is crucified. They lost Jesus in that form. He's gone, right? And then on the third day, he's resurrected, and two men are on their way from Jerusalem to Emmaus, which this parallels Livy's History of Rome, in which two men are traveling the road to Elba Longa, which is the same exact distance. It's an interesting story for another time. Anyways, they're walking on this path and they're talking to one another about the fact that Jesus died and all the prophecies and all the things they were hoping would happen didn't happen. And a man appears with them and starts talking with them, and it's Jesus, but he appears to them in another form, and he never reveals himself to them. He just talks with them, and he follows them to the place they're staying for the night, and then he goes to break bread. And when he breaks bread, their eyes open and they realize it's Jesus. But the moment they realize it's Jesus, he disappears. He vanishes when they realize who he is, because now it's the old form. They recognize the old form and they're like, "Oh, it's you." And they want to grasp onto that form, but he vanishes. And then they say, "Wait a minute. Remember how our hearts burned within us when he spoke with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" The symbolism being, once they realized this was him, there was now the temptation to grasp the form, the old form. So he vanishes, so they're forced to realize how he's now appearing in a new form, which is as this inward burning, this inner experience rather than this outward thing that can be grasped. And so, anyways, I don't know. Somehow that ties in with up, but it does. But the letting go of the old form and the reappearance of the thing in a new form, the boat, same thing. The spirit of adventure, the onward, upward, forward call, and but the clutter, exactly as you said. There's when you sweep the clutter away. Every time I clean my house, I'm very sentimental. Like there's a thin line between me and a hoarder because I'm so sentimental about
I am too.
everything.
I just
Every
want to keep everything. Oh my
oh,
God. I gave
any
away 10 bags of things that I loved
yeah,
to Goodwill when we moved from one house into the other
yeah.
house.
I'm the
There
guy
was,
who will drive around with the bags in my trunk for like a
uh-huh.
month before I'll let it go, and then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
It's like,
get
oh
out of here.
God, I have to give
Yeah,
this to them. I've got to do the drive through thing and
yeah.
just throw it out of the back of the car and just take it, take it, take it. I don't want to know. I don't want to look.
And even when I do it, I almost have to make a ritual of it. I literally do. I open the bin and I say, "Thank you for how you served me in days gone by." And I take a breath in, and I hold it, and then when I drop it in the bin, I release it, and then I say, "I welcome new things." But it's a cleansing experience even when you do something like that, and even letting go of physical objects like that. It is amazing the space you suddenly feel open up in you when you let it go, and you do create a space. You create a vacuum for new things to come in and find you. I really believe that. Yeah.
I think that it's abundantly obvious that that's how it works.
Hmm.
I don't think there's anybody that's watching or listening to this tonight that has had uh, an alternate experience. There
Yeah.
is something cleansing and healing about letting go.
Hmm.
Um, but that phrase, like, I talk about, write about the chicken and the egg pecking our way out of our 3D shell and coming out into the universe and seeing the universe around us. Um, and that's a letting go too. That's a letting go of this little safe space that we
Yes.
inhabit until we literally outgrow it
Yes.
and then have no choice but to break free.
Hmm.
Because otherwise, you know, you don't ever hear of chicks that just don't want to peck their way out of their shell and just die, shrivel up and die in their shell. That
Yeah.
doesn't happen. Nature itself dictates. It's an immutable law that nature dictates that you outgrow, and then you take on a different form in the same way that the caterpillar in the chrysalis outgrows that compartmentalized little package that holds him and keeps him safe until he grows wings. And then as those wings begin to spread, it literally ruptures
Yeah.
the chrysalis from the inside out. And then he takes flight. You know, there are 1,000 different metaphors for what we are talking about, but really, ultimately, the common denominator is evolution, growth, whether that be physical, whether it be spiritual, psychological, emotional. We are all in flux. We
Yes.
are all growing. We are all moving forward in some way, shape, or form
Mhm.
all the time. And there are those of us that are repulsed by the notion of change in
Mhm.
any form.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that become very staid and set in their ways and might be hoarders or just, might be neatniks that everything around them has to be exactly so
Yeah.
in order for them to feel comfortable in their environment. There's a full spectrum of behaviors that go along with the mindset.
Yes.
To be stagnant, to be literally fearful of change and growth and maturity.
Mhm.
We began talking about how boys mature much later than girls do,
Yeah.
if at all.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for that, because women have to be the ones that are responsible ultimately for the
Yep.
propagation of the species,
Yeah.
and being responsible enough to take care of their own offspring so that they can grow to adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, that's why even in our best attempts ritualistically to symbolize that passage, we fall short. But I mean, you look at the great lengths, ancient peoples went to try to grow their boys up,
Mhm.
right? It just goes to show you what a woman naturally passes through. It's built into, and that's stagnancy. That's a key word. You said that a minute ago,
Yeah.
because a lot of people confuse stagnation with stability.
Yeah.
And
And
stability,
actually treat them interchangeably.
yes. And they're like, well, I never change. I'm stable. You know,
Right.
actually, no, because not changing is insane and
Yeah.
therefore is unstable.
Well, it's
Um,
counterintuitive to a universe that is perpetually
yeah,
undergoing change. As I like to
yeah,
say, the universe is all fluxed up.
yes, yeah,
That's all that it knows is
yeah,
constant change.
yeah. So you're resisting the very model in which you are embedded, which is the pattern
Right.
that you're, the image in which you're created. Even if you tease it out further and you get metaphysical and you want to think in terms of God, like it, like so in Orthodox Christianity, the best they could come up with to describe the notion of God is the concept of Trinity, and the word Trinity is the word. There's a word used to describe it called perichoresis, which means to move in a circle, or it means a
Mhm.
circle dance essentially. And the imagery is meant to suggest that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit in this model of spirituality are constantly in a state of giving and receiving. So the Father gives to the Son has to receive from the Father, then the Son gives to the Spirit receives from the Son, the Spirit gives to the Father, and then in Christian imagery, then that circle is opened up and all of humanity is included in it. And so we're now part of this grand circle in which we're always receiving, but then we also have to give. So the very notion of God, if God ever stops, God not only has to receive, but God has to give. So if God ever stops letting go, God even ceases to be God. And if that's the image we're made in, whenever we cease to let go, we cease to be truly ourselves. because that's the blueprint. So even if we just look at it in terms of the universe, where there's always a dying and a giving and a burning up so that new life can come, or whether we think of it in terms of God, that's the model. As above, so below, that we can't get away from. And if we resist that pattern, we resist the very nature of reality, and whatever it is that we are experiencing, as real as it might seem, isn't real. William Blake said, the man who never changes his opinion is like standing water, which breeds reptiles of the mind. And it's like whenever we cease to let go, right, we cease to move forward.
Right.
And then we can call ourselves stable, but the truth is we're just simply stagnant, right? And everybody but us usually knows it, right? So it's time to get our brooms out. It's time to do some sweeping. When you said sweeping, this image came to me. If I can share it very briefly, and I feel like I'm talking a lot tonight, Andrea. So
No, that's fine. That's it's how it should be, or it would be different. So
okay, I was gonna
just
say, just please pull out the cane if you need me to shut up. uh, um, pardon me. This passage came.
broomstick.
Yes, broomstick. So this came to me from it's from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, verse. Hold on, I'm looking for it. I lost my place here. It's in my notes, and I will find it. Okay, Luke 11:24. So of course I'm approaching this metaphorically, not as a fundamentalist and esoterically, but Jesus says when an unclean spirit has gone out of a person. So you can think of that literally, or you can think of that more in terms of when you let go of something. When you let go of something that in this season of your life is not serving you, in this season of your life has become a detriment rather than a benefit. When an unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it wanders through waterless regions looking for a resting place, but not finding any. It says, I will return to my house from which I came. So I'm going to go back to the person who I left and see if there's still a vacancy. When it comes, it finds it swept and put in order. Finds it swept and put in order. Now, immediately we would think, okay, well, it's swept and put in order. It's clean. The thing can't return. But then Jesus says, then it goes and it brings 7 others with it, more evil than itself, and they enter and live there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So here's an interesting thought. There has to be, when we let go of something, there then does have to be a sweeping and an ordering, right? We let go, and there's a cleansing and a cleaning up that happens. But it says that it finds it unoccupied, swept clean and unoccupied. And so then it comes back, and the latter end is worse than the former. So it's not just simply about letting go. It's
Right.
about, and this is I'm mixing metaphors here, obviously, but it doesn't all
You'll get
work
it.
perfectly out of this. But it
Yeah.
came to me because of the sweeping metaphor. But when you let go, you have to let what you let go of become, you have to let something new in, right? You
Hmm.
can't just sit there unoccupied but swept clean. It's not just about cleaning out a hoarder's house and then leaving it empty so they
Yeah,
can
because
just
it will fill right back up with more hoarded
yeah,
items.
and then it'll
Um,
become worse. The key
right.
is
And in
fill it
many
with
ways,
beauty. Yeah, fill it
yeah.
with beauty. Bring out the inherent beauty of the space. Find a way to make what was always there shine bright and sing and dance and come alive. Otherwise, it's just going to be worse at the end than it was at the beginning, and all the cleaning out really will have been for naught. So
Or
it's not
not.
just about letting go. It's about letting go so that so that you can move forward into the new, right? So that was a thought.
The whole concept of that is very closely akin to the 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 lecture that I give about mastering the mind. Um, and for me, it's not sweeping per se, like the actual
Yeah, yeah,
physical.
yeah.
When I'm doing the dishes, doing a load of laundry, ironing something, the Sisyphean tasks of life
Hmm.
is when my mind is free. I don't
Oh,
have to think about what I'm doing. Cooking, I don't
yeah.
have to think about what I'm doing. And so it it frees my mind, particularly when I'm just hand washing dishes. We have a dishwasher, but I like to wash dishes,
Yeah.
so I do. Um, and what'll happen is that's when the icky stuff sneaks in. For some reason, I'll, a memory from 40 or 50 years ago, a particular, a bad experience, a humiliation I suffered, a trauma that I suffered, weird things like that. When my mind is free to just be, sometimes it goes to the dark side. And I don't know why these things just keep coming up, and I have to ask myself, are they coming up because I never resolved them? Are they coming up as opportunistic? Are they coming up just to fill the void, that vacuum that the universe abhors?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so when I talk about this, what I tell people is when the icky stuff is starting to creep in, like, one of those shadow figure things. I
Mhm.
mean, people call them demons. I don't know if demons exist, but I do know that we all have our own demons that we wrestle with, and that
Right.
we are in perpetual conflict with. And I have found that the only way to resolve this is to cast them out of the classroom.
Mhm.
You're expelled. Get out.
Yeah.
I usually say it like, get the fuck out, because God knows I love that word.
Mhm.
But,
And you say it with a lot of authority. So.
and I do. We'll do
Mhm.
a whole show about it one night about
Yeah.
that. Um, and they are expelled out of the room. Get out. Get out.
Yeah.
But then, if you don't immediately, not 5-10 minutes later, immediately fill that void with the most glorious, spectacular, beautiful, loving imagery, whether it's from something that happened in your past that was an extraordinary memory, or something that you're projecting into the future. I'm going to go to Scotland next year. I mean, that kind of thing. It's like, wow, okay. And you just flood it. You
Yes.
flood that vacant valley with everything that you can that is beautiful and right and pure and true and clean and
Mm.
lovely. Um, and then there's no room left at the inn
Yeah.
for those demons to sneak back up the hill and crawl down into the valley.
Yeah.
There's no place for them to go, because the placid waters will entice them, but it
Yes.
will drown them.
Mm. Yeah. No. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And that's the whole thing. It's the sweeping and the cleansing occurs so that the new can be established, whatever it is, whether it's like you said, in a moment of just, having to cast down a thought, and then but as you said, if you just go on with your Sisyphean tasks throughout the day and you just, well, I got rid of the bad thought, now I'm just mindlessly going about my day, those thoughts are going to come back,
Right
but
back.
right back. So you have to fill it with something else. You know, I, people dig at, affirmations and make fun of people who do that kind of stuff all the time. But dude, that stuff works. The Emile Coué's very simple, day by day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. How sing-songy and syrupy and simple can you be?
Mhm,
That simple meditate, or that simple affirmation saved my mind
mhm.
not all that long ago.
Yeah.
I was really struggling, and I just laid on my back in my pool and just said it to myself in the warm summer sun over and over and over until I felt that that was the truth. Until I actually felt that thought take over my body, soul, and spirit. And I
Mhm,
was like, I'm not going down. This is not the end of anything. It's the beginning of everything. The best is yet to come every day in every way. Yeah, I'm getting better and better. That's just the truth. And my whole being believed it. And that like possessed me and became like my mantra for like a few years,
mhm.
and yeah, replacing those thoughts with other things, like, or even just and then like in a larger macrocosmic sense, like someone like myself who leaves behind the role as a pastor, that was my whole life,
No,
and when that's sucked out of you, there's this void. You're like, whoa,
I
what
know.
do I do now?
What
And
do
then
I do now?
there's a lot of stuff waiting at the door wanting to rush in and fill that void, right? And so
Hmm.
you have to find a bigger goal. You have to find something, and you have to start small sometimes. Like you said, it might not be, oh, well, I'm going to become this great author and I'm going to travel the world, whatever. It might just be, we're going to go to Disney World in the summer.
Hmm. Yeah.
Seriously. Or you might have to scale it way back and be like, we're going to go to Cracker Barrel for dinner tonight, guys.
Yeah.
Like,
That is
seriously.
scaling way back, unless you hit the clearance rack. I'm
Yeah.
telling you,
Yeah.
I love paying 10% of full retail for crap. I do. Even if I just buy it and give it to somebody I think it'll look better on,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because I'm saving that much money. I'm telling you, there's something about it.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
we're ending the show tonight on Cracker Barrel. Oh my God.
That's not a bad place to end in
It's
the fall,
not. It's not, except that I never got any dinner and now I'm hungry. Thanks so
I'm
much for bringing that up.
I'm sorry. I had a great dinner tonight for my daughter's birthday, so I'm
I
like,
know. And happy birthday to her. 16,
yes.
right?
She's 14. She's my youngest.
14. Oh, okay.
So,
I
yep.
went ahead instead of
So
okay. Got it.
she's a double seven, two sevens. Yep.
Yes, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. Well, we are out of time, folks.
Yes. Hmm.
Class is never dismissed. I mean, you could just move on to the next room, next session of your life, and just bring your broom, because we've both discovered that you kind of need to keep it handy.
Yeah.
It serves a purpose. And when things are tough, flip over and float.
Yes.
So, with that, we love you all. We thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week on Soul School.
Peace.